This is Between the Brackets, a Mediawiki Digest, episode 70, September 29th, 2020. Hello, I'm Yaron Koren, and welcome to another installment of BTB Digest, Between the Brackets for people too busy to listen to the whole interviews, or people who just want to hear the highlights, or people who have heard all the episodes but just want to hear some recaps. There are no wrong answers here. Speaking of previous episodes, I'm very excited to say that you can now find all the episodes on YouTube as well, thanks to the efforts of an enterprising Between the Brackets listener, Julian Tremblay McClellan. The episodes will still be in the usual places, but they'll also be on YouTube, so that's exciting. I know there are people who prefer to get all their videos and audio stuff too on YouTube. It does have some advantages in the interface over a lot of audio players. Anyway, let's get to the clips. Way back in June, I talked to Sarah Rodlund and Alexandra Paskulin, who are both technical writers at the Wikimedia Foundation. They do a lot of their own writing, as you might imagine, but the clip I chose was one where I asked them about handling other people's writing. After some new feature is added, I asked them, do they feel some responsibility to enforce that the developers of that feature also now have to document it on the Mediawiki.org website? It's a dilemma that affects a lot of open source projects, but maybe really any software project. Or actually really any project at all, just in terms of getting people to do things when you don't have direct control over them. Anyway, here's what they said, starting with Alexandra.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I would probably go with something more like facilitator over enforcer. Right. But I do think there is a place for someone to be, watching patch requests on Gerrit and saying, hey, have you documented this? And could we even automate that process? Could we build something into CI that says, oh, I noticed you changed the file. Did you know that there's this wiki page that you might want to update? So I think that there's room for some guidance. But I think that in general, in my experience, developers want to write documentation, right? They're writing documentation for their future selves. And I think that everyone can empathize with that. So yeah, I think that it's the role of technical writers, but I think that also everyone can do that. So if you see a patch request that needs documentation, if you see a wiki page and you have a question, there's something maybe not covered, jump in, ask.
Yeah, can I jump in on that too?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Sarah. And I think in Alex's view, that's so essential because we are a community project. And I think that's what's so exciting about working on Mediawiki documentation or any documentation for the Wikimedia projects is that writing is a collaborative effort. Documentation is a collaborative effort. And this is this amazing space where we get to work with people in collaboration and see how they do it together. So my feeling is that there will always be a little bit of a mess, and that mess is okay because we're kind of working through that and trying to figure that out together. And that is just as essential to our project as everything else that we do is doing it in community.
Yeah, that makes sense. But Sarah, I wonder. I guess this gets back to the idea of enforcement, although that's probably the wrong word. But I wonder if there's more that should be done to just to I guess track problems in documentation like bugs are tracked and say so it's at least recorded somewhere that whoever created this library extension at least knows that the documentation at this point is lacking.
Yeah, I would say too, I think that's part of what Alex and I and other people working on documentation in the movement are trying to work on right now. We do have, in Fabricator, we have a documentation workboard, and it is large. People tag everything as documentation. So I wouldn't say it's to be an enforcer, but part of our role is to help organize that process, kind of organize that chaos and make it easy for people to be able to do this work. Because I think one of the things that I realized when I came into this role is we really didn't have any processes for that. We didn't have processes for surfacing documentation, deciding what was important, auditing documentation, understanding what the needs of users were. And so one of the things that I try to think about in terms of our projects is that we're not in a fully mature state with that, but we're working our way toward that. And so this is a part of becoming, kind of gaining that maturity. But I would not say, I would say, I think I just take issue with the word enforcer.
Well, yeah, okay.
Like we can't, nor would we want to police that. Like when you have such a vast community, you really have to look at what are people doing now? What are the processes they're engaging in now? And how do you come in and work with the existing systems and the existing software that people have and their existing patterns to get them to be able to kind of take in another behavior or take in another way of doing things. And so that takes a little tinkering and experimentation, because what you want for people to adopt these things because they're easier or they work better or they improve things, but not just because you say, like, it's kind of like when somebody tells you something's good for you and you're definitely like, I'm not going to do that. Sure. You kind of have to let people decide, like, you have to be an example, and you have to help people decide that that's what they will, like, if this is going to work for them. Yeah.
If I had to rephrase it, maybe I would say a nudger. That's like a popular word these days.
I would say I like this phrase. It comes from teaching. It's a guide on the side, basically. Huh. So you kind of, on a very base level, you can kind of be a person who can answer questions or help or kind of like say, like, this is the best practice or this is a process that might work. But in the end, it takes, I'll always go back to community. In the end, it takes a community to adopt it,
right,
and kind of implement it together. Otherwise, for our projects, I don't think it will work very well. I can't think of a case that in the many years that I've been at the foundation where telling people that to do something works as well as like working with them to make it happen.
Next, I talked to Tom O'Neill, who runs the internal wiki at the U.S. Department of Energy, Powerpedia. He also runs the federated Mediawiki Community of Practice group in the U.S. government. Tom is sometimes asked about the benefits of Mediawiki from people in the U.S. federal government and even people in other governments. So for this clip, I asked Tom if he could describe his pitch for why people in governments should be using Mediawiki.
So what I've found is that a lot of times people have great intentions when standing up an intranet, and they'll put a lot of work into creating the content, but it is difficult to keep the content growing and maintained unless you have a dedicated team that's constantly working on it. And if you hadn't guessed, I don't have a nailed down elevator pitch for this, wow. But basically, Mediawiki, it's number one, it's a free software. It allows people to contribute. There's accountability. That's something that we have. We borrowed from Intellipedia, and the accountability features, I think, are very strong. We actually want every account and every edit to be directly traced to an individual. And of course, the undo and the version control is incredible in Mediawiki. And so you can actually see what changes were made, and it allows a decentralization of the creation of content and the curation of content. And I think it's just a really efficient way of making people more productive, finding the information they need quickly and easily without having to go around asking people, what does this acronym mean? Or, of course, they're doing like a Google search, but that's not what the acronym means in this context. And
Sure.
so Parapedia, we actually, of course, we're the government. We love our acronyms, and acronyms can mean five things or more.
Right.
And if we can have even just a stub article, a short article on each one, that is more information than they had, and sometimes that's sufficient enough information to even know what organization stood it up. And since we also can look up individuals, we actually have DOE's phone book is available. It's in the wiki as it's actually a Drupal website backend, but it's shown within the wiki, so you can actually search people and find out what organization they're a part of. If you want to look up individual contributors, so you actually can find an email address for everybody who makes an edit, and then you can use that email address to look up and find out what organization they're in and additional information, or of course directly email them.
Yeah.
So the broad accountability for the edits, I think, is also really important. Now, I think there will always be a level of discomfort for some with allowing content to be edited in that fashion, but I think it's much more efficient than having to go through 5 layers of approval to make even a basic change to like an internet page. And that's also going through that process. You're using up taxpayers' time and effort, and time. You're spending money by potentially wasting the time when you could just allow somebody to make an edit directly themselves, and then have accountability and people who could have a page on their watches and get email notification when that change is made, and be able to review. Oh, that makes sense. That's a good edit. And that's all it is. In 5 minutes, maybe for each party, and you accomplish the same thing. And it also removes the level of frustration of having to jump through hoops to make those type of changes.
In the next episode, I talked to Richard Knipel, who has been involved with a whole lot of things wiki-related in the last 15 years or so, but most recently Wikispore, a sort of wiki farm that he's trying to get accepted as a Wikimedia Foundation project. In this first clip, Richard talks about the motivation behind Wikispore, and interestingly, it turns out that Wikidata played a part in it.
I'm most familiar with art because of my work with museums, and also I've been engaged with the art and feminism effort, and some other efforts, looking at marginalized people in the art world. And there are a lot of say, this is an example from the art world, but it applies widely, that there are a lot of important artists and important art concepts and art movements that don't fit the technical criteria on Wikipedia. But if we apply some more specialized criteria, we can find this is a way to integrate it. Ideally, there might be a topic on Wikipedia. This is my sort of ideal that has some information. But to find some more information, you might go to Wikispore and find out, some supplementary information that is maybe, and it's obvious that it's drawn from a little bit of a different sourcing standard.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned Wikidata. Do you feel like the existence of Wikidata and all these entities that don't have any Wikipedia articles or anything else has sort of pointed to the body of knowledge that exists that isn't currently being covered by these existing projects, and is, I guess, a motivation for Wikispore?
Yes, I think so, because I've come across, like, there's for example, there's a property on Wikidata for on the work list of on the work list. I think, I forget what the property number, 5,000 something, and it was a bit of a controversial property, but the idea is that these are items that we want to develop that maybe ideally should have Wikipedia articles, And we want to maybe fill in as much of the information, say if there's a biography on the person as possible beforehand. But I mean, there are all sorts of things that, might not necessarily fit on Wikipedia. Obviously, there are all these, there are all these books, there are all these scientific articles. You can get a lot from structured data, but you can't get everything. And I think particularly there's a sweet spot for a lot of these less well-known topics that could be covered in interesting ways. I mean, there are also like so many wikis out there that don't have a home, that are someone's passion project, and they're paying out of pocket to host them, and there's no like long-term plan for them, and I think that wikis are cheap relatively, and if we say this is the type of wiki that it has a nonprofit purpose, it's providing information, it's not politically it's not politically partisan, and I think the Wikimedia Foundation could and should provide a home for a lot of these efforts. I think that an information ecosystem is stronger when it's when there are a lot of connections, and I think it's an area that we've historically neglected a bit.
In the second clip from that episode, Richard talks about the difference between the Wikimedia approach now and the approach back in 2003 or even back in 2010, when everything was more experimental and there were a lot fewer barriers to trying new things, which is something that affects Mediawiki as well.
So there's a tension between sort of like the amateur and the professional in the wiki universe, and in the Wikimedia movement and Wikipedia in particular. And I think sometimes we've been overreacting to like trying to stress this must be very professional and everything must be 100% approved ahead of time, and there has to be like a 6-month study before we do any new project.
Right.
And some of the generativity and some of the creativity and some of the fun has been left behind, and obviously people can do things that are inappropriate, but I think that we shouldn't become so ossified, and we should do some more experiments, and Wikispore is a way to provide more experiments for our movement, and a way to provide a structured way and a friendly way to provide more experiments for our movement. And I hope very much it's a friendly and structured way.
Yeah, that makes sense. It actually that sort of came up in the episode with Trevor Pascal. He was talking about how easy it was for him to create and design the vector skin, with basically no need for approval.
Yeah.
And
things that don't need approval are great. I mean, that's what attracted me to the Wikimedia movement. That there's a way to expend your intellectual curiosity in like productive ways that do not require forms being signed in triplicate, and there's it's nice that we don't lose that energy. It was quite easy to become involved with Wikipedia and Wikimedia 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Right.
It's become less easy over time, and some of us old timers have been spoiled, and we forget how much harder it has become.
After that was the episode with Raimond Spekking, a longtime Mediawiki developer and consultant who somehow never wanted to work for the Wikimedia Foundation. In this first clip, Raimond talks about something that probably every Mediawiki consultant has dealt with, which is clients who want fine-grained access control, as in the ability to dictate who can read and write different pages, and who worry about Mediawiki's lack of real support for that kind of thing.
A lot of things are possible with access control. It's more than Wikipedia has as access control.
Sure.
Sometimes the rules are so strict, it does not make sense to use Mediawiki. It happens.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's when things like, well, I don't know what people generally use in cases like that. SharePoint definitely has a lot of access control stuff.
I try to consult them, to say to them, trust your clerks, trust your guys. They will use the wiki as a wiki, But sometimes the company is not ready for an open system.
Yeah, okay, right. Open not in the sense of open source, but in the sense of, everyone can edit anything.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It tends to be, it tends to be a much bigger fear on managers' part than it should be. The idea that everyone can edit anything. Yeah.
That's a problem, but it's not my problem.
Okay.
So it's their truth.
Raimond is actually probably best known not for his Mediawiki development or consulting, but rather for the massive amount of photos that he has uploaded to Wikimedia Commons over the last 15 plus years, numbering in the tens of thousands, which have ended up not just on Wikipedia, but in countless newspaper articles, magazines, and even books. I asked him if he had any advice for people who wanted to follow in his footsteps and take freely licensed photos that would end up in a lot of places. Here's what he had to say.
Nearly every kind of photos, I would say. No party photos, not from your friends.
Well, okay.
That's already, yes.
Already good to know.
But every photo that shows a city, shows a church, shows politicians at work, not in private situation, but at work, are useful for Wikimedia Commons and for Wikipedia. So, and the better the photo is, the better it is, the usage is. Try to make clear, clean photos, but not shifted by 5 degrees or so. And it's sometimes. Sometimes I see photos that are horrible.
Yeah, okay.
So I do not say that every of my photo is good, of good quality. Surely not. But try to make clean photos, good photos.
And then the final episode for this digest was with Albert Kettner, a scientist at the University of Colorado who runs the wiki for the Community Surface Dynamics Modeling System, or CSDMS, which isn't really a system at all, but rather an international scientific organization with thousands of members. We talked a fair amount about their use of Mediawiki, but the clip I chose is not about wiki stuff directly, but rather about the state of science. I asked Albert whether the explosion of both software and data over the last 20 years or so have had an impact on what scientists do, if they have forced a lot of scientists to become amateur or even professional data scientists, statisticians, and even programmers. Here was his response.
It's funny that you're asking. I've seen, and this is, so one of the things we provide for our community is some sort of a job list. So whenever jobs are available that we hear from, we put it on the CSDMS page, as long as there is a numerical modeling aspect to it, right?
Oh, okay.
So, and that could be, PhD positions, postdoc positions, but also in industry. If there is a need for a hydrological modeler or something, we will, and we get that through our emails or through some list service, we post that. Now, over the years, we're tracking this since 2012 or 13 or something. Since then, there is a significant increase in the number of jobs that are requiring numerical modeling. We post now at least double the amount of jobs as previous, and it's still a few hundred jobs, but there's definitely an increase there. So yes, I would say scientists are required to get better numerical skills, I think, and not only for numerical modeling and capturing processes, but also for data processing. Data is becoming more and more available, and so large big data sets, so the need to process those to get to the to a specific parameter or to a specific outcome requires more modeling.
Yeah.
Or more coding, sorry.
I mean, is it true, capital B, capital D, big data with Hadoop and all that stuff that you end up having to use?
Big data. Well, so I see it in my role as monitoring flooding. There, I'm handling satellite data.
Oh yeah.
And the sensors that I mentioned before, the MODIS imagery, it's a 250 meter resolution, and it captures 2 images of the world on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So that's quite a big data set, right?
Yeah.
Now there are there's the private companies like Digital Globe, which is now Maxar, or Planet. They provide data on 10 meter resolution or even half a meter resolution images of Earth. And the European Space Agency has radar data on 10 meter as well for the whole Earth. So you can, that's such an upscaling that at some point you don't have the time to process all that data. Right. And get maps out. So you have to focus on only those areas that are flooding, so that it changes your whole strategy of how to handle, in my case, flooding, right? And the same can be said for other data scientists, I think. It's the amount of data to makes you, I think 30 years ago, you were happy if you got some data that you could then, massage and say something about a process you're interested in. And nowadays it's more like, okay, how can I handle this huge amount of data to get to a maybe more precise answer that I'm after.
And that's it for BTB Digest number 11. I hope you liked the clips. On the next episode, there will be an all-new guest or guests. Till then, stay productive, and I'll see you next time.